Welcome back to my channel, TheThoughtEcho. In today's episode, we're diving into the world of IT governance, specifically how effective risk management plays a crucial role in keeping things secure. Risk management specialists have a toolkit of strategies to keep risks at manageable levels. In this session, I will break down how smart risk management can reduce the impact of IT security incidents, and why it's essential to regularly assess risks and maintain a risk register. We will also touch on different ways to treat risks, like risk avoidance and risk transfer. I will take you through calculating the annual loss expectancy, or ALE, and how that compares to the cost of implementing security controls. Speaking of controls, we will explore different types, like preventative and compensating controls, and their significance. Lastly, I will connect the dots between configuration management and information technology security, walk you through setting up security baselines, and discuss best practices for cloud storage replication and backing up your data to the cloud. Stick around for a deep dive into these critical topics. Let's first dive into our core topic, risk management, and talk about the ever-growing wave of cybersecurity threats organizations are facing. It's like a constant storm, and managing the risk is absolutely key. But here's the thing, risk management isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Every organization needs to tailor its approach based on its unique needs. The goal? To minimize the impact of incidents by using a solid risk management framework and sticking to it over time. Now, every business has some level of residual risk, the risks that remain even after we've done all we can to reduce them. The big question is, do the benefits of a business activity outweigh those risks? And more importantly, is that leftover risk acceptable to the organization? To answer this, the first step is to understand what you're protecting. That means you need to identify the assets that hold value to your business, whether it's trade secrets, sensitive customer data, or even key employees. Once we have that inventory, we prioritize the most valuable assets to safeguard first. To make this process easier, many organizations use centralized automation tools, like configuration management systems, that can help track assets, even on a cloud network. Once we've got an inventory, it's time to identify the threats that could impact those assets. What's the likelihood of these threats happening? It could be based on your organization's past experiences, or even broader trends in the industry. For example, even if your organization hasn't been hit by ransomware, the increasing frequency of these attacks makes it highly probable it could happen soon. Risk management isn't just about identifying risks, it's about mitigating them. This involves implementing security controls and monitoring their effectiveness over time. A critical part of this is managing sensitive data. Enter the role of a data custodian, who ensures data is handled in line with rules set by the organization's top-level executives or data owners. Another approach to managing risk is using tools like failure modes and effects analysis, FMEA, which helps prioritize risks and dig deep into the root causes when incidents happen, so we can prevent them from recurring. Root cause analysis is essential in getting to the bottom of problems, ensuring we address the actual issue, not just the symptoms. There are also industry-wide risk management frameworks to help guide organizations. For example, NIST, the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, focuses on managing emerging risks and developing best practices across Europe. Then there's NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, which has detailed guidelines on how to define and review security controls effectively. Periodic reviews and continuous monitoring of those controls are critical to ensuring they're doing their job. When it comes to the types of IT threats we're facing, they're vast. Social engineering attacks, like phishing emails or phone scams, remain rampant. There's also the risk of malicious apps in public app stores or software supply chain attacks. And, of course, malware like ransomware, which locks up your data and demands a ransom for it back. Add to that the risk of unauthorized data disclosure, and you've got a wide variety of threats to manage. Sometimes, managing risk means bringing in external help, like outsourcing some of your risk management efforts to third parties. This could be cybersecurity insurance, or even outsourcing your IT services to a cloud provider. In these cases, part of the risk is transferred to those external entities. And let's not forget the option of working with specialized risk management consultants who can guide you through these complexities. That's a lot to unpack, but it's all part of staying ahead of the game in today's cybersecurity landscape. Managing these risks is an ongoing process, and we will continue our exploration with risk identification. Let us enter the world of risk identification and understand how crucial it is to staying ahead of the curve when it comes to managing cybersecurity threats. First up, let's talk about how risk identification gets started. It all begins with defining metrics that are relevant to detecting risks and continuously monitoring them. And here's the cool part. By setting up alert notifications, you can be automatically notified when certain metrics hit a threshold. That means you're always in the loop, even when you're not actively watching. There are so many ways to measure risk, and we will get into more of those as we go along. But at the core, managing risk means knowing how to spot it early on and taking immediate action to reduce the impact, all while staying true to professional ethics. Some aspects of risk management, like data privacy, are legally mandated with regulations in place. But then there are areas that, while they might not be legally required, should still be tackled from an ethical standpoint, like contractual obligations where the responsibilities may not be explicitly written out, but still need to be followed. One technique used in risk identification is the Delphi technique, essentially a method where you consult a panel of experts outside the organization to assess emerging risks and vulnerabilities. This is especially important because the threat landscape is always evolving. If we're not monitoring for new risks, like zero-day exploits, we risk being caught off guard and unable to respond quickly enough to contain incidents when they do pop up. Speaking of emerging risks, that's a huge part of what we're focusing on in risk management. For example, zero-day exploits take advantage of vulnerabilities that are known to attackers, but haven't been discovered or patched by vendors yet. This is where the Delphi technique really shines by tapping into the knowledge of experts to assess the level of risk involved with certain activities. Another valuable tool is SWOT analysis, looking at your organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This helps you evaluate how effective your security program is by reviewing everything from IT infrastructure and personnel roles to how often security policies are reviewed and enforced. It's a holistic look at your organization's security, and it can give you a competitive edge while improving compliance with laws, regulations, and contractual obligations. Now, let's talk about root cause analysis. After an incident, the priority is always to contain and eliminate the threat. But the real learning happens when we analyze what caused the issue in the first place. A root cause analysis might reveal, for example, that a ransomware attack came from a phishing email because employees didn't have proper security awareness training. By digging into logs, looking at monitoring alerts, and even talking to personnel, we can pinpoint the factors that contributed to the breach and prevent it from happening again. This process ultimately strengthens an organization's security posture and reduces costs. But the battle doesn't stop there. The threat landscape is constantly changing. We're not just talking about traditional threats like phishing emails or ransomware. We are seeing new risks pop up, like social engineering attacks that can happen over the phone or in person, or even remote vehicle hijacking, where attackers exploit connectivity in modern cars. The risks to cloud computing services and the use of mobile devices, especially when working from home, also need to be factored into your risk management plan. Now, let's talk about some real-world examples of identifying and mitigating risk. One huge risk that every organization faces is compromised user accounts. A simple but highly effective countermeasure here is enabling multi-factor authentication. This means, in addition to just a username and password, you'll need another form of verification, like a code sent via text or an approval request on another device. MFA is far more secure than relying on passwords alone. Then there's the ever-present threat of social engineering attacks, where attackers manipulate people into revealing sensitive information. To counter this, the best defense is user awareness training. Regular, updated training that covers real-world examples of phishing scams, phone-based fraud, and social media trickery can help your team recognize these tactics before they fall victim to them. Another risk is the compromise of IoT devices. These are often overlooked, but can be a huge vulnerability. To mitigate this risk, you'll want to monitor the networks where IoT devices are located and ensure they are properly isolated. Changing default configurations and regularly updating firmware can also help make these devices more secure. So there you have it. Risk identification is all about knowing what to look for, using the right tools and techniques to spot threats early, and implementing proactive measures to minimize their impact. It's an ongoing process that keeps evolving, just like the threats themselves. Stick with us as we continue to unpack how organizations can stay one step ahead in managing cybersecurity risks. Our next crucial topic is risk measurement. As the saying goes, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So, in the world of risk management, measuring risk effectively is key to staying on top of potential threats. First things first, we need to set up metrics that give us a clear indication of how likely certain risks are. Picture this. You're monitoring the water level in a dam. When the water level rises above a certain point, it's an indicator that there's a growing risk of overflow or even breach. This is a perfect example of a risk indicator. You have a baseline, what's normal, and if things start moving beyond that, you know you're getting closer to a potential risk. This approach is grounded in quantitative data, hard numbers like water level or pressure readings. But sometimes risk management isn't just about numbers. Let us think about qualitative risk measurement, which is based more on interpretation and judgment. For instance, consider trying to predict the likelihood of a data breach in an organization that has strong security measures in place, but has never had an incident before. It's hard to pinpoint a precise percentage of risk, but based on your knowledge, you can interpret the situation. That's where qualitative methods come in. It's less about exact figures and more about evaluating what could happen given the context. Next, let's talk about key performance indicators, KPIs. These metrics help measure how well things are performing. For example, a KPI could track the response time of your customer service team when a critical system goes down. Another example might be monitoring the effectiveness of your intrusion detection system. How quickly does it catch and alert you to suspicious activity? KPIs provide a snapshot of whether business goals are being achieved, and they give you key insights into areas like the effectiveness of security measures. With KPIs, you can gauge things like whether your security controls are working well or if it's time to adjust your approach. Now, let's take it a step further with key control indicators, KCIs. These are used to measure how well your security controls are doing their job. Imagine your objective is to protect sensitive customer data. One of your controls could be implementing strong encryption for data in transit. The KCI would tell you whether that control is effectively reducing risk. KCIs could cover other controls as well, such as periodic security audits, employee training programs, or even access control systems like biometric authentication for high security areas. So, KCIs essentially answer the question, are our security controls working as they should? Are they minimizing risk? Or do we need to rethink our strategy? Lastly, there are key risk indicators, which help you track the level of risk associated with specific processes, departments, or systems. For example, let's say your company is rolling out a new mobile app for customers. This introduces a new set of risks, perhaps vulnerabilities in the app's code, or risks related to how users interact with the app. KRIs would help measure whether those risks are manageable. You might implement strong encryption for app communications or require two-factor authentication for accessing sensitive data through the app. Tracking these KRIs helps you assess whether the residual risks are acceptable or if further controls are needed. And to really get a handle on your risk data, many companies use risk heat maps. Think of it like a color-coded chart that shows where the risks are most severe: red for high risks, yellow for moderate, and green for low risks. This visual representation makes it easier to understand and communicate the level of threat, often more effectively than lengthy reports. Finally, how do we make all of this work in practice? This is where governance, risk, and compliance (GRC) tools come in. These tools allow you to create a centralized risk register where you can prioritize risks, assign owners, and set severity levels. The best part? Many of these tools generate risk heat maps automatically based on your risk data, so you get a visual representation of your risk landscape without having to build it manually. So, in a nutshell, risk measurement is about defining the right metrics, whether quantitative or qualitative, and using KPIs, KCIs, and KRIs to monitor and manage those risks. With tools like GRC platforms, you can stay on top of emerging risks and make informed decisions about how to handle them. Now, let's learn about established risk assessment guides, which provide you with trusted best practices and serve as a valuable reference. Let's take a look at NIST Special Publication 830, which is a key guide for conducting risk assessments. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, provides this publication to help organizations assess and manage risks. If you search for NIST SP 830 online, you'll find a direct link to the publication on the NIST website. The guide outlines that risk assessments are a critical part of effective risk management and decision-making within an organization. It's important to note that risk assessments shouldn't be a one-time activity. They need to be recurring, continuously revisited throughout the system development lifecycle, including phases like system design and acquisition, even when working with off-the-shelf software. The publication further discusses how risk assessments help identify, estimate, and prioritize risks related to organizational operations. This includes understanding the threats that require attention, any vulnerabilities the organization might be exposing, the potential impact of threats, and the likelihood of them occurring. All of this plays a vital role in managing risk and making informed decisions. As you go through the document, you will notice that it highlights the importance of framing and prioritizing risk, determining how we will respond if a threat materializes, and establishing effective monitoring systems. Detection tools like intrusion detection systems can help identify suspicious activity, even with emerging threats we may not be fully aware of. The guide also covers various threat sources, including cyber attacks, human error, environmental failures like server room temperature issues, and natural disasters. all these risks need to be accounted for in our assessments. Another crucial aspect discussed is the role of security controls. These are measures like up-to-date malware scanners across all devices, which help mitigate risks. Monitoring and managing these controls effectively are essential for ongoing risk management. NIST SP 830 also touches on how organizational culture impacts risk assessments, such as the industry an organization belongs to and its risk tolerance. Additionally, it contrasts quantitative and qualitative risk assessment methods. Both are important in the overall framework of risk management. Lastly, the publication includes a series of tables with examples of various threat events, such as mishandling critical data or inadequate privilege settings. These need to be identified, recorded, and prioritized to assess their potential impact on information security systems. For those new to risk assessments or risk management, going through NIST SP 830 is highly recommended. It provides foundational knowledge that supports many risk management frameworks. Now, let us shift our focus to learn about 3 lines of defense in risk management and security. The 3 lines of defense is a fundamental model in risk management and security that helps assess the effectiveness of security controls and overall risk governance. It is called 3 lines because it consists of 3 distinct layers: operational management, risk and compliance functions, and auditing. We'll break down each of these roles and their importance in maintaining a strong risk management framework. At the core of this model lies the process of identifying risks, prioritizing them, and assigning accountability, ensuring that every risk has an owner responsible for managing it. While risk ownership often resides within the organization, it can also be outsourced to specialized third parties, such as professional risk management firms or cybersecurity consultants. Why the 3 lines of defense matter. A key takeaway from this model is the need for continuous monitoring of security controls. Simply implementing a control, such as a network perimeter firewall, is not enough. Without ongoing assessment, how would we know if it has been compromised, if it is effectively blocking threats, or if its configurations need adjustments to counter new and emerging risks? This brings us to accountability, a crucial element in risk management. Someone within the organization must be responsible for tracking changes, responding to evolving threats, and ensuring compliance. Risk management is dynamic, and without a dedicated owner overseeing these aspects, gaps in security can emerge. Ultimately, effective risk management relies on identifying, mitigating, and auditing risks, reporting the findings to senior leadership for informed decision-making. Now is the time to break down the 3 lines of defense. First one being operational management, the first line of defense. Operational management is responsible for designing, implementing, monitoring, and managing security controls. The goal is to maximize the effectiveness of these controls, ensuring they align with security objectives and compliance requirements. For instance, security policies play a crucial role in this process. Organizations may have various security policies, including background checks for new employees, email usage policies, VPN access guidelines, and incident response protocols. Consistency in following standard procedures is essential, not just for security, but also for measuring the effectiveness of deployed solutions. The second line of defense is risk and compliance functions. The second line of defense ensures that security controls are functioning as intended and that the organization remains compliant with regulatory requirements. With increasing data privacy laws and cybersecurity regulations, risk and compliance teams are more critical than ever. A core function here is defining risk exposure, assessing the risks associated with specific activities, tools, or business processes. Every risk must have an owner responsible for managing residual risk and reporting it to senior management. This layer acts as a checkpoint to ensure that operational risk management is functioning effectively. The third line of defense is auditing, which provides an independent review of risk management activities. Audits verify that operational management and compliance functions are meeting expectations and adhering to required frameworks. Audits can be conducted internally or by external auditors for objectivity. The scope of an audit may include financial documents, business processes, security policies, vulnerability assessments, and compliance with regulations. Security audits specifically focus on technical areas such as database security, application security, and system configurations, ensuring that risks are properly managed. The three lines of defense model is a structured approach to risk management, accountability, and security oversight. Each layer plays a critical role in safeguarding an organization against threats, ensuring compliance, and fostering a culture of continuous improvement. With that, let us shift our focus towards risk assessments. Effective risk management hinges on regular and thorough risk assessments. These assessments help organizations identify vulnerabilities, evaluate threats, and determine the best ways to mitigate risks. Risk assessments can be conducted internally, externally, or through a combination of both, depending on the organization's needs and regulatory requirements. The first step in any risk assessment is identifying assets, which could include anything from trade secrets, company reputation, customer personal data, or intellectual property. For government agencies, assets may include citizen records or critical infrastructure data. Each identified asset must be prioritized based on its value to the organization. Why? Because high-value assets require greater attention in terms of security and risk mitigation. Once assets are prioritized, we must evaluate vulnerabilities and threats associated with them. This involves questions like, what threats exist against these assets? How likely is it that these threats will materialize? What would be the impact if they did? Assessing likelihood is often subjective and depends on the expertise of the risk management team. For example, they might evaluate the probability of a ransomware attack on a hospital's patient database, or the likelihood of a power outage affecting financial services in a specific region. Another critical component of risk assessments is examining existing security controls, the safeguards in place to protect assets. The assessment determines: are the current controls effective? Do they need adjustments or replacements? Are they being monitored continuously? For example, an organization might have a firewall to prevent cyber intrusions. But if it hasn't been updated in years, it might no longer be effective against modern threats. The assessment could recommend patching vulnerabilities or deploying additional layers of security. Risk assessments are not a one-time activity. In most organizations, they should be conducted at least annually. However, certain industries, such as finance, healthcare, and critical infrastructure, may require quarterly or semi-annual assessments due to strict regulatory compliance requirements. For example, a bank handling online transactions might conduct a quarterly risk assessment to ensure compliance with financial security regulations like PCI DSS. A pharmaceutical company managing clinical trial data might conduct semi-annual assessments to protect intellectual property and patient confidentiality. A cloud service provider may need continuous risk assessments to comply with evolving cybersecurity regulations. There are various techniques used in risk assessments. One common method is the failure modes and effects analysis, FMEA, which helps organizations map out potential points of failure in business processes and IT services. This technique helps in understanding how data flows through systems, what vulnerabilities exist in that flow, What risks arise if data security fails? For instance, in the aviation industry, FMEA is used to analyze how failures in aircraft control systems might lead to safety risks, allowing preventive measures to be put in place. Similarly, in information technology world, FMEA can be used to analyze potential breaches in a cloud storage system containing sensitive customer data. Another component of risk analysis is contingency planning. What happens if security controls fail? Organizations need to assess the worst-case scenario. What are the consequences of a major data breach? What would happen if a ransomware attack encrypted company files? How quickly could the organization recover? This directly ties into incident response and disaster recovery planning, ensuring that businesses can react swiftly and minimize damage in case of a security incident. Conducting periodic risk assessments offers multiple advantages, including regulatory compliance for meeting standards like PCI DSS, HIPAA, and GDPR, cyber insurance compliance for ensuring that the organization meets cybersecurity insurance requirements to protect against financial losses from cyber attacks, better protection of sensitive data for safeguarding customer and shareholder interests by minimizing exposure to risks, enhanced incident response for improving recovery times by refining incident response plans based on assessment findings. For instance, a telecommunications company might conduct a risk assessment that reveals vulnerabilities in its customer database. As a result, it implements stronger encryption and multi-factor authentication, significantly reducing its exposure to data breaches. A critical element of risk management is determining whether a business activity is worth the risk. This involves evaluating whether the potential benefits outweigh the risks. For example, a retail company collecting customer purchasing data for marketing must assess: is storing this data beneficial for personalized advertising? Does the risk of data breaches outweigh the potential revenue gains? Risk management acknowledges that some degree of residual risk is unavoidable. However, decisions must ensure that risks remain within acceptable thresholds. Another consideration is the cost of noncompliance. If an organization fails to comply with security regulations, what fines, legal consequences, or reputational damage could it face? A notable example is large tech companies facing hefty GDPR fines due to improper handling of customer data. In such cases, organizations must balance the cost of compliance against potential regulatory penalties and ethical considerations. Many organizations adopt ISO 27001, 2022, a globally recognized framework for information security risk assessments. Clause 6.1. 2 of this standard focuses specifically on conducting risk assessments, providing a structured methodology for organizations to identify, evaluate, and mitigate risks. While not legally required in all industries, ISO compliance enhances credibility and can open doors to business opportunities. A company that follows ISO 27001 standards is more likely to attract enterprise clients, government contracts, and international business partnerships. A risk register is a centralized list of identified risks within an organization. It includes risk ID and description, date of identification and last update, likelihood of occurrence, impact level, assigned risk owner, mitigation strategies. For example, a risk register entry for ransomware attacks might include mitigations such as offline backups and endpoint detection solutions. A risk register entry for customer data breaches might include an incident response plan reference. Most modern risk management software includes risk registers, allowing integration with incident response plans and compliance reports. Risk assessments are a vital component of an organization's overall risk management strategy. By identifying assets, evaluating vulnerabilities, monitoring security controls, and adjusting policies accordingly, businesses can reduce exposure, enhance resilience, and ensure compliance. Now is the good time to talk about risk acceptance. Every business activity involves some degree of risk. The key question is that risk acceptable? Organizations must determine whether the potential benefits of an activity outweigh the associated risks. This brings us to risk treatments, which refer to the various strategies used to address and manage risk. The approach taken depends on an organization's risk appetite, or its willingness to tolerate uncertainty in pursuit of its objectives. A fundamental principle of risk management is that every identified risk must be documented in a risk register and assigned to an owner responsible for managing it. One of the most common approaches to dealing with risk is risk acceptance. Risk acceptance, also known as risk retention or inherent risk, occurs when an organization acknowledges a known risk but chooses not to take specific actions to mitigate it. In this case, the organization deems the potential loss acceptable should the risk materialize. This means that instead of implementing additional controls or safeguards, the organization proceeds with the activity as is, accepting the risk as part of doing business. Let us take a moment and look at real-world examples to be able to connect to the subject. We will consider both IT and non-IT. First, with non-IT example. Imagine you decide to swim in a lake without wearing a life jacket. There is an inherent risk of drowning, but based on your confidence in your swimming abilities and the calmness of the water, you accept this risk without taking any extra safety precautions. Here is information technology scenario example. An IT manager might decide that Microsoft Windows Defender provides sufficient malware protection for company devices. Instead of purchasing additional third-party endpoint security software, the organization accepts the risk of potential malware infections, deeming the built-in security measures adequate. Risk acceptance is not uniform across all organizations or individuals. Several factors like organizational culture, past experiences, financial stability, regulatory and legal considerations, personal risk perception influence whether a risk is considered acceptable. Some organizations have a higher risk appetite than others. A startup in a highly competitive market may take more risks compared to a well-established financial institution that prioritizes stability. If an organization has previously engaged in a risky business partnership that turned out successful, it may be more inclined to accept similar risks in the future. A company with strong financial reserves may be more willing to accept certain risks, knowing it can absorb potential losses. Conversely, an organization with limited resources may opt for more conservative risk treatments. Certain industries, like healthcare and finance, have strict laws and compliance requirements that may limit the level of risk an organization can accept. On an individual level, risk perception is shaped by background and upbringing, social and financial status, education, and age. Someone raised in a risk-tolerant environment may be more willing to take calculated risks. Individuals with greater financial security may take on risks that others would avoid. A more experienced professional might assess risks differently than a newcomer in the field. Even in cybersecurity, malicious actors take risks for reasons beyond financial gain. Some hackers deface websites or launch cyber attacks for peer recognition or status within hacking communities. While risk acceptance is a valid approach in certain scenarios, organizations should also consider alternative risk treatments based on the nature and severity of the risk. Now is the right time to speak about risk avoidance. Risk avoidance is one of the primary approaches to risk treatment. It becomes a viable option when other strategies, such as risk transfer, are not the best fit. while risk transfer involves shifting some or all of the risk to a third party, such as purchasing insurance or outsourcing IT infrastructure to a cloud provider. Risk avoidance takes a different approach. Instead of mitigating or transferring risk avoidance simply means not engaging in a particular activity at all if the risk level is deemed too high. So, when is risk avoidance the best choice? Organizations strive to minimize the impact of risks, and risk treatment plays a crucial role in strategic decision-making. If the residual risk, the risk that remains after controls are applied, is too high and exceeds the organization's risk appetite, risk avoidance may be the most prudent course of action. This means that the organization chooses not to move forward with a project, investment, or initiative to completely eliminate the associated risks. While risk avoidance is the ultimate way to prevent losses, it also means foregoing potential opportunities. However, this decision is not made lightly. Before concluding that avoiding a risk is the best option, an organization must conduct a thorough risk assessment within a structured risk management framework. Let us understand how organizations decide on risk avoidance. To determine whether risk avoidance is the right strategy, organizations typically conduct risk assessments to evaluate the likelihood and impact of threats. Consult the risk register, which documents historical risks and their treatments. Use risk heat maps to visualize risk severity and compare it to similar scenarios. Most risk management software includes risk registers and heat maps, which rely on well-documented risks to inform decision-making. Let me take you through a few examples of risk avoidance in action. First, let us look at finance-related risk like high-risk investments. Imagine an investor has the opportunity to invest in highly volatile financial derivatives that promise massive returns. However, these derivatives also carry an extremely high risk of losing the entire investment. If it is risk reduction strategy, then the investor might limit their exposure by investing only a small percentage in derivatives while diversifying the rest of their portfolio. And if it is risk avoidance strategy that is taken into consideration, the investor may completely opt out of investing in derivatives, avoiding potential financial losses altogether. This same logic applies across various business and IT scenarios where the potential downside outweighs the potential benefits. An information technology-based scenario can be avoiding the storage of sensitive customer data. In the world of IT and cybersecurity, organizations often face a critical decision. Should they collect and store sensitive customer data, or is the risk too high? Consider an organization that processes credit card transactions. Under the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, businesses must ensure the secure handling of cardholder data. However, they have an important choice. As per risk avoidance strategy, the company decides not to store cardholder data after a transaction is completed, reducing the risk of a data breach entirely. If storing cardholder data is necessary, the company may implement strict encryption, a risk mitigation strategy, or outsource payment processing to a third party, which is a risk transfer strategy. By not storing sensitive data, the company avoids regulatory risks, legal liabilities, and cybersecurity threats, a perfect example of risk avoidance. Let us consider another information technology example to see the risk avoidance strategy. An IT team evaluates consumer-grade Internet of Things, IoT devices for business use, but finds that they have poor security features and lack encryption. The organization chooses not to deploy these devices in its infrastructure, avoiding potential security vulnerabilities, which is a risk avoidance strategy. If the devices must be used, the organization could implement additional security controls, which is a risk mitigation strategy. The organization may partner with a vendor offering secure IoT solutions, which is a risk transfer strategy. In this case, risk avoidance eliminates unnecessary exposure to cyber threats that could arise from weak security in IoT devices. Let us look at trade-offs of risk avoidance. While risk avoidance can effectively eliminate threats, it also comes with downsides, particularly the loss of potential opportunities. A company that avoids collecting customer data for security reasons may miss out on valuable marketing insights. An organization that avoids using emerging technologies due to security concerns might fall behind competitors who take calculated risks. That's why many organizations combine multiple risk treatments to find a balanced approach. For example, instead of fully avoiding a risk, they might mitigate it by implementing security controls like encryption, firewalls, access restrictions. Transfer it through insurance policies or third-party services. By combining risk treatments, businesses can engage in high-value activities while still managing their risk exposure effectively. Let us try to understand, when is risk avoidance the right choice? Risk avoidance is a powerful strategy, but it is not always the best solution. Organizations must carefully weigh the potential benefits against the risks before deciding to opt out of an activity. If the risk is too great and the potential losses are unacceptable, avoidance may be the safest approach. If the business opportunity is significant, it may be worth considering risk mitigation or risk transfer instead. By leveraging risk assessments, risk registers, and heat maps, organizations can make informed decisions about whether to avoid risks entirely or manage them through other treatments. Risk management is all about making smart decisions that balance opportunity and security. While risk avoidance eliminates threats, it can also limit growth and innovation. The key is to assess risks carefully and select the most appropriate treatment based on the organization's goals and risk tolerance. Now is the best time to talk about risk transfer. Risk transfer, also known as risk sharing, is a method of risk treatment where an organization shifts some or all of its risk to a third party. This approach is commonly used when directly mitigating the risk, such as by implementing security controls, is either not feasible or too costly. Risk transfer can take many forms, including outsourcing, subcontracting, cloud computing, managed service providers, and insurance policies. However, organizations must carefully evaluate contractual obligations and liability agreements when engaging in risk transfer, as accountability can sometimes be a gray area. Risk transfer does not eliminate risk, but instead allocates responsibility to another entity that is better equipped to manage it. This can reduce an organization's exposure while allowing it to focus on its core operations. Let's explore some common forms of risk transfer. Traditionally, insurance has been a primary method of risk transfer, covering risks such as fire, flood, theft, vandalism, property damage, medical and liability claims. However, in today's digital landscape, cybersecurity insurance has emerged as a crucial risk transfer tool. Organizations can purchase cyber insurance policies that provide coverage for incidents such as ransomware attacks, data breaches, distributed denial of service attacks. While cyber insurance can mitigate financial losses, policies often come with strict requirements. Organizations must adhere to best security practices, such as regular patching and system updates, implementation of multi-factor authentication, periodic risk assessments to maintain compliance. Without meeting these requirements, claims may be denied, making it essential for businesses to maintain proper security hygiene. Many organizations transfer IT risks by outsourcing critical operations to third-party providers. Common outsourcing scenarios include offloading infrastructure management to a public cloud provider, hiring an MSP to handle system administration, network management, and security updates, engaging third-party vendors for security monitoring, penetration testing, or compliance audits. When outsourcing, organizations must clearly define accountability in contracts. For example, imagine an MSP technician remotely managing a company's network via VPN access. If their laptop is infected with malware, which then spreads to the company's systems, who is responsible for the damage? Without proper contractual protections, liability can be unclear, potentially leading the organization to absorb the costs of recovery. This is why service agreements and security clauses are critical when engaging third-party providers. One of the most prevalent forms of risk transfer in IT today is through cloud computing services. Organizations that rely on on-premises infrastructure must manage risks related to hardware failures, power outages, physical security breaches, data loss, and backup management. By migrating to the cloud, organizations transfer these risks to the cloud service provider. However, risk transfer is not absolute. It follows a shared responsibility model. Under the infrastructure as a service model, the cloud service provider is responsible for physical servers, networking, and storage hardware. The customer is responsible for securing virtual machines, applying software patches, and managing configurations. This means that while the risk of hardware failure is transferred, the responsibility for proper system security still lies with the customer. Organizations must ensure that misconfigurations, weak credentials, and lack of encryption don't introduce new vulnerabilities. Service-level agreements are another method of risk transfer, commonly found in cloud computing and IT services. For example, a cloud provider might guarantee 99.9% uptime. If this uptime threshold is not met, the provider compensates customers with service credits or financial reimbursement. However, service-level agreement violations may not always fully cover the financial impact of an outage. If an e-commerce site loses revenue due to downtime caused by a cloud provider, the compensation received from SLAs may not be enough to offset losses. This is why organizations often combine risk transfer methods, such as service-level agreements plus cyber insurance, to create a multi-layered risk management approach. When deciding whether to transfer risk, organizations must consider contractual limitations. Some agreements prohibit subcontracting or risk outsourcing without prior approval. Insurance policy requirements. Cyber insurance may require strict adherence to security best practices to remain valid. Residual risk. Transferring risk does not always eliminate exposure, as shared responsibility models still require active security management. Organizations must carefully assess what risks can be transferred and what residual risks they must still manage internally. Risk transfer is a valuable strategy, but it is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It is most effective when risk mitigation is too costly or impractical. Third-party providers are better equipped to manage the risk. Financial protections like insurance or service-level agreements provide a safety net. However, blindly outsourcing risk can create new challenges if accountability and security requirements are not clearly defined. A balanced approach, combining risk transfer with proper security controls, is often the best strategy. Risk transfer plays a crucial role in modern risk management, whether through insurance, outsourcing, cloud services, or service-level agreements. While it reduces direct exposure, organizations must ensure they fully understand contractual obligations, shared responsibilities, and compliance requirements to avoid unexpected liabilities. Let us now dive into risk reduction, the most common risk treatment strategy and most widely used. It involves implementing security controls to decrease the likelihood of a risk occurring and to minimize its impact when it does. The goal is to proactively manage risks rather than simply accepting them or transferring responsibility to a third party. Organizations achieve risk reduction through a structured risk management framework that includes periodic risk assessments, continuous monitoring, and adaptive security controls. These measures help ensure that threats are identified, mitigated, and kept under control over time. Risk reduction follows a systematic approach. Identifying risks. Example, data breaches, insider threats, fraud. Implementing security controls. Example, encryption, firewalls, multi-factor authentication. Continuously monitoring those controls to ensure effectiveness. Reassessing risks as new threats emerge. For example, let's consider a risk scenario. The potential exfiltration of sensitive customer data. We have security controls implemented by deploying data loss prevention tools, enabling disk encryption, and enforcing network firewalls, and continue to have ongoing monitoring with regular audits and security policy updates to address new attack techniques. Risk reduction is an ongoing process. Security controls that work today may become ineffective tomorrow due to evolving threats, making continuous monitoring essential. Now let us focus on types of risks and how they are managed. Preventable risks are those that fall entirely within an organization's control and can be managed internally. These include compromised user accounts and systems. Organizations can reduce this risk by enforcing strong password policies, multi-factor authentication, regular system patching and updates. Another scenario, insider threats and employee misconduct. While it's uncomfortable to think about, organizations must consider risks related to employees engaging in fraud, example, falsifying invoices for personal gain, privilege abuse, where internal users misuse their access rights, employees being blackmailed or bribed into leaking sensitive data. To address these risks, organizations can conduct background checks and ongoing employee monitoring, restrict privilege access to only essential personnel, establish clear policies on acceptable behavior, and enforce consequences. Strategic risks involve external partnerships where an organization has some level of control but not complete oversight. For example, a company enters a business partnership with a third party, thereby sharing both the potential benefits and risks. While the company may require the third party to follow security policies and compliance regulations, it cannot fully control the partner's security infrastructure. Mitigating strategic risks involves risk assessments before engaging with a business partner, contractual agreements, ongoing monitoring of third-party security practices. Even with these precautions, there is always residual risk, but organizations proceed when the potential benefits outweigh the risks. External risks originate outside the organization and cannot be directly controlled. These include natural disasters like floods, hurricanes, wildfires, market fluctuations, cyber threats from unknown external actors. While these risks cannot be prevented, organizations can reduce their impact by disaster recovery planning to ensure business continuity in case of a crisis, cyber incident response strategies to mitigate damage from cyber attacks, risk transfer methods like cyber insurance coverage for financial protection. For example, an organization cannot prevent a hurricane, but it can establish backup data centers in multiple regions, implement business continuity plans, purchase insurance coverage for financial losses. Even after implementing security controls, some residual risk remains. This is the risk an organization accepts after all risk reduction measures are applied. For instance, a company with strong cybersecurity measures still faces a small chance of a data breach due to sophisticated attacks. A hospital with redundant power supplies still faces minor downtime risk during a prolonged outage. To ensure that residual risk remains within acceptable limits, organizations use recovery time objectives, RTOs, which will ensure systems are restored within an acceptable timeframe. Financial risk assessments will evaluate the impact of residual risk on revenue. Legal and reputational risk evaluations will assess potential regulatory penalties and brand impact. To further reduce risk exposure, organizations conduct risk scenario planning, simulated exercises designed to test security readiness. Common methods include tabletop exercises like interactive discussions where teams walk through potential risk scenarios and response strategies. Wargaming, more advanced simulations used in military and emergency response planning. And incident response drills, simulating real-world cyber attacks to test response times and coordination. These exercises help organizations refine security policies based on real-world challenges, train employees on emergency protocols, prioritize critical risks, and allocate resources accordingly. By continuously evaluating and refining risk response plans, organizations can better manage threats and minimize business disruptions. While risk avoidance and risk transfer are viable strategies in certain situations, risk reduction remains the most widely used approach. The key to effective risk reduction is continuous assessment, proactive security measures, and real-world scenario testing. Preventable risks should be eliminated through strong internal controls. Strategic risks should be carefully managed through assessments and contracts. External risks require robust contingency planning. A well-structured risk management framework allows organizations to minimize threats, reduce financial losses, and ensure business continuity, ultimately keeping risks at an acceptable level. Every business activity carries some level of risk, but effective risk reduction strategies can minimize potential harm. Organizations must take a proactive approach by continuously monitoring risks, testing their response capabilities, and refining security controls. By doing so, they can ensure greater resilience, regulatory compliance, and long-term success. Effective risk management requires the right tools to conduct risk assessments, monitor risks over time, and ensure compliance with security standards. This is where governance, risk, and compliance (GRC) software comes into play. GRC tools provide organizations with a structured approach to identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks, while also ensuring adherence to regulatory and industry-specific security requirements. A comprehensive risk management tool should offer functionalities that support governance, risk management, compliance. Governance ensures a structured approach to risk management at the organizational level. Risk management supports conducting risk assessments, maintaining a risk register, and monitoring risks. And compliance features will enforce adherence to industry regulations, security standards, and legal requirements. Let us explore these core components in detail. One of the most critical features of GRC software is a risk register, a centralized database that can identify risks and categorizes them by type and severity. Assign risk owners responsible for managing specific risks. Track risk impact and likelihood using quantitative or qualitative measures. This feature ensures that risks are systematically recorded, monitored, and prioritized based on their potential impact on the organization. A strong GRC solution should help organizations maintain compliance with industry frameworks like PCI DSS for payment security, ISO 27001, and NIST 853. Conduct regular audits to verify adherence to security policies. Generate audit reports that track the effectiveness of risk mitigation strategies. For instance, Compliance tracking might include security questionnaires for third-party vendors to ensure their security policies align with organizational requirements. When outsourcing business functions or IT services, organizations introduce a degree of external risk. GRC tools often include third-party risk assessment features, such as security questionnaires for vendors and cloud service providers, tracking security controls implemented by third parties, monitoring compliance with regulatory frameworks. For example, if a company relies on Microsoft Azure Cloud Services, GRC tools can help assess what sensitive data is involved, what network security measures are in place, how does the vendor ensure compliance with industry regulations. By integrating vendor risk assessments into a GRC platform, organizations gain visibility into external security risks. A risk heat map is another essential feature that allows organizations to visualize risk severity using a color-coded system for high-risk areas that can capture critical threats that need immediate action. Medium-risk areas, which will be potential threats that require mitigation, low-risk areas that can have minimal risk exposure, and acceptable risks, which can include residual risks that can be tolerated. Color-coded heat maps help organizations quickly identify and prioritize the most severe risks, visually highlighting, ensuring that resources are allocated efficiently to address high-impact threats. A well-integrated GRC platform provides seamless risk tracking, compliance enforcement, and real-time monitoring, making it an essential tool for reducing organizational risk exposure, ensuring compliance with evolving regulations, managing vendor and third-party risks effectively, improving security governance and decision-making. Organizations looking to implement a risk management framework should evaluate multiple GRC solutions and conduct product demos to find the best fit for their industry and business needs. Risk management is not just about identifying threats. It requires the right tools to monitor, assess, and mitigate risks over time. A robust GRC solution provides businesses with comprehensive risk assessment capabilities, a structured risk register to track and assign risks, compliance management features for security standards, audit tracking, and vendor risk assessment. By leveraging GRC software, organizations can take a proactive approach to risk management, ensuring better security governance, regulatory compliance, and business resilience. In this podcast, we've explored how to effectively manage IT risk in a cost-effective and strategic manner. We delved into risk management principles, including identification, measurement, and assessment methodologies, ensuring organizations can make informed decisions when addressing risks. We examined risk assessments, breaking down the 3 lines of defense model to understand how operational management, risk oversight, and auditing contribute to a strong risk framework. Additionally, we explored various risk treatment strategies, including risk acceptance, which is acknowledging and managing acceptable risks, risk avoidance, which is eliminating risks that exceed organizational tolerance, risk transfer, which is outsourcing risks through insurance or third-party services, risk reduction, which is implementing security controls to minimize risk impact. By applying these risk management strategies, organizations can enhance resilience, ensure compliance, and protect critical assets while maintaining a balanced approach to cost and security. Ultimately, effective risk management is not just about mitigating threats. It's about making informed, proactive decisions that align with business goals. Thank you for tuning in and taking the time to learn about risk management best practices. We hope this discussion has provided valuable insights to help you strengthen your organization's risk posture. Stay proactive, stay informed, and until next time, stay secure.